Hey everyone, this is Daniel. I know we were supposed to be reading a script called Underage this week, but due to some technical difficulties, the audio file has been compromised. So instead, I've gone back into the off-screen archives to reclaim a lost episode, which was recorded back in September of last year. The audio quality may not be up to our current standards, but at least this way you'll have something to listen to. I know how annoying it can be when a podcast skips a week without warning. Also, by way of apology, I'm going to share something on the Facebook page, which actually I've been meaning to post for a long time. It's kind of a how-to guide for screenplay structure, which I wrote back in college. Some of the language is a little cringeworthy to me now, but I still agree with the overall approach to storytelling, which I've laid out. And at the very least, it will give you some context for what I'm talking about on the podcast when I use terms like point of attack or a character's want versus their need. And of course, my favorite, the midpoint. So you can look for that at facebook.com/OSPodcast. Last thing, the script we'll be reading next week is called Malpractice by Tyler Marseca. A disgraced surgeon is enlisted by terrorists to assist in the bombing of a political convention. Alright, thanks as always for listening, and here's the episode.
Welcome to Offscreen. Today we are reading Situation Comedy by Vasko. A young woman, feeling directionless, stumbles upon a mysterious courtyard where she is transported into a sitcom-like universe, becoming a major character on this TV show. Kat Vasko was a journalist who had done some work with the website for KCET, which is
a public TV station?
Yeah.
But so she's primarily a journalist.
At least that's what she was.
Okay.
But yeah, she wrote this. She has no credits on IMDb.
Although you said she may be writing something else?
Yeah, she adapted a book based on a trapeze artist who in the early 20th century was one of the biggest stars in the world, as she performed for Ringling Bros. And Barnum and Bailey Circus. And the movie is about her tragic love affair with another trapeze artist.
Okay.
So Vasko adapted that book. That book is called Queen of the Air. And I guess one of the producers of American Sniper is involved with it, and Warner Brothers is thinking about picking it up.
Okay.
Right.
So should we get into the actual synopsis now?
Let's get into the actual synopsis.
And I want to just warn everyone that this is not the way we usually do this. I usually write a synopsis, but I forgot or just didn't have time
just can't be bothered
this week.
Because,
to be honest, keeping it real.
That's what we do. We keep it 100.
Did anyone say that?
Yeah.
I've never heard that.
There's even an emoji for that.
For keeping it 100?
Yeah.
Is it like 100% real, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay. So our protagonist, her name is, I think, Clemence, is how you say it? Or Clemence. We said we would say Clemence. I think it's French. So her name is Clemence, and she works at a coffee shop by day. And by night, she has a webcomic where she kind of satirizes her self-absorbed customers and other people. She has a roommate named Fitz who plays a bunch of video games and doesn't have a lot going on. I don't even know what to say about him. He'll come into play more later, but she just has a roommate named Fitz. She also has what the screenplay describes as a fuck buddy. His name's Liam, and he's like a kind of awful... He writes steamy novels. He reminds me of like that Christopher Walken character on SNL. Did you ever see that? Where he's always wearing like a bathrobe and he just like seduces women in his apartment?
Mm-mm.
Okay, never mind.
But he feels like the type of guy, to me, he feels like the type of guy that appears very well-to-do, but you really never know where his money's coming from or how he's paying for it.
Yeah, he has a really nice house.
Nice house, cool car. He thinks he's a good writer. He maybe has some success with that, but I don't I really think so.
Anyway, they're friends with benefits.
Yeah.
So the first, like, real important thing that happens, I would say, Clemens finds out that LA Weekly posted a link and sort of wrote a little recommendation, or like kind of they spotlighted her webcomic, and she got like 10,000 views overnight.
Normally she gets 10.
Right. So she's over the moon about this, but her boss finds out at the coffee shop, and he is really not happy about the way that she's like portrayed his coffee shop. And so he fires her on the spot. And then that same day, she also finds out that Liam, her fuck buddy, has a very real girlfriend, like, seemingly long-term. I guess they don't specifically say that. Seems like he's been with this girl for a long time. And shortly afterwards, she's at the laundromat and sees these three kind of annoyingly good-looking, happy people, 2 guys and a girl, all friends, at the laundromat.
Who she's seen before.
She has seen them before, yeah, but she decides just on a whim to kind of follow them as they leave, and they head to this mysterious kind of courtyard through a gate where she's never been before, and she goes in after them, and as soon as she gets through the gate, suddenly everything is much brighter looking, and she's much prettier and thinner, and her clothes look really nice. And she follows them to like this idyllic sort of cliche-looking apartment complex. Pretty effortlessly, she blends in, and they think she's like a new neighbor. She introduces herself, and she actually looks next door at this apartment that they said was supposedly empty, where they assume that she's moving in. She goes over there, and there is all this furniture and a bunch of books, and even like framed pictures of her webcomic on the wall that had been published like in the New Yorker, I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
So she realizes like this place is actually hers, and now that like everything has fallen apart in her real life, she decides she's going to give this new fantastical place a chance, and it's made pretty clear right away that this is like a sitcom world. Like there's a laugh track when they make jokes. There's like theme music that plays. If she tries to say a bad word, it'll bleep her.
Mm-hmm.
And she's, I guess, also made sort of comfortable by this whole thing because she does herself watch a lot of sitcoms, which they just barely set that up. I thought it was not very well established. But anyway.
But I think at one point she remarks about like finding solace or comfort and like the...
Yeah.
Kind of what I took away from the beginning. Well, we'll save it for later.
Okay. So the point is she decides she's going to stay here in sitcom world and live there.
Right.
The only catch, which I thought was a really weird plot device, but again, we can say this later, there are no working toilets, I guess is what we're made to believe.
There's no toilet in her apartment because her apartment, her life isn't the source of like toilet humor.
Whatever. That's so contrived, but she doesn't have a toilet, so that, I guess, is the reason that she...
Because it's all really fake. Like, she notices her appliances don't plug into anything.
Right.
She comes home every night and her bath is drawn for her. Right. It's all bubbly and there's a glass of wine.
Anyway, the point is, since she doesn't have a toilet, she ends up leaving to the real world again, occasionally, to go to the bathroom. Which is how the story facilitates, like, her seeing her roommate again, and her roommate Fitz also does not have a job, and so they're like really struggling to pay the bills and pay the rent, and he has no idea where she's going all this time, and she doesn't really explain it. But we'll get back to more of that in a minute. So these new friends of hers in the sitcom world, I think there are 3 of them. Harris and Annie, who are sort of like a would-be couple, sort of like any sitcom, like a Ross and Rachel type.
Yeah, they're a Ross
Are
and
they
Rachel.
or aren't they a couple? And then there's Nathan, who becomes Clemence's romantic interest. And he's more of like a bookish type. So they hit it off, and get to know each other a little more, and eventually Nathan reveals to her that he is actually just like her. He came from the real world and has decided to stay here. So that's when we start finding out some of the like repercussions, I would say, of living in the sitcom world. One is that time passes much more quickly in the real world when it seems like not much time has passed at all in the sitcom. Clemens also finds that she has forgotten how to draw. She's suddenly like just completely paralyzed when she tries to create a webcomic. Right. Also, they can't really have sex. She tries having sex with Nathan, and every time they begin, it just cuts to like black, or it fades to black or something, and suddenly it's the next morning, because you can't show that on a sitcom. So they kind of struggle with these limitations while still wanting to stay in the sitcom world because it's still much easier and they don't have any obligations or bills or anything like that. But Clemens still goes back to go to the bathroom every now and then to the real world and just kind of to check in, I guess. But she eventually finds that like they're about to get evicted from their apartment because they're not paying their bills.
She and Fitz.
Yeah, she and Fitz are about to get evicted. And they have a big fight, and I don't think much really comes of it. She just kind of storms out again. Fitz is just upset that he hasn't seen her and doesn't know what she's doing, and obviously isn't helping to pay the bills.
Right.
So she goes back again to the sitcom world, and they're having like a birthday party for her. Supposedly it's her 30th birthday, although they explain that they just kind of arbitrarily have a party sometimes when they don't have any other plot lines to happen in the show. But anyway, they have a party for Clemens, and Liam, of all people, shows up. He doesn't even seem fully aware of like where he is, the fact that he's in a sitcom. But he tries to reconnect with Clemens, and she tells him about Nathan, so they get into a fight about that, which results in Liam storming off, and Nathan kind of finds them after the fight and takes it the wrong way and thinks maybe she does still have feelings for this Liam guy. So then they get in a fight, which ends in Clemens trying to burn down the apartment, which seems really extreme, but I guess in context, it's about all the bigger questions of like whether it's really good for them to be living here or versus the real world.
Mm-hmm.
So she burns down the apartment building. The whole thing catches on fire. Everybody evacuates, and they see all these other neighbors they've never seen before who are like other TV show character types.
Stars of their own sitcoms.
Yeah, or not even just sitcoms. Like there's sort of a cop
TV
drama or something, and like a doctor, and yeah, other types of TV shows. But anyway, Clemens decides she is finally going to go back to her real life, and Nathan decides not to. He's going to stay, and so they have to part ways. And then in the last act of the screenplay, we find Clemens is staying at a homeless shelter now that she's back and she's been evicted from her apartment. Fitz now rescues her from the shelter. He has a boyfriend, David, who I did not set up earlier, but I think that was the one that he had like a date with earlier. Anyway, he's with this guy, David, and David is pretty well off, I guess, and they're okay with taking her in, just letting her crash on their couch now so that she has somewhere to go. And so she's starting to get used to life in the real world again when finally Nathan shows up outside her apartment and says that he's also decided to stay in the real world. And
he shows up like raving, like he looks like a homeless guy on the street
he's
shouting.
He is kind of crazy, and they have this funny exchange where they're both telling each other all of the things that are wrong with him.
Mm-hmm.
Which is to say, like, very not sitcom-like about them, like the very real problems that they both have. And once they've both accepted that about each other, she runs down to meet him in the street, and they have a reunion, and that's pretty much the end of it. They get back together.
Nice.
Okay.
They get back together in the real world this time.
In the real world, yes. And I think they explained that all the other characters fled, too, didn't they? Remember when they were being rescued from the shelter? Or when Clemens was being rescued from the homeless shelter? After they leave, some of the guys working at the shelter said, like, we got a bunch more coming in. And they're saying, like, all these other characters that we saw.
Yeah, I think it's left up to us to infer that.
Yeah. Anyway, that's the gist. So, what was your overall impression?
Overall, I thought it was good. I thought it was interesting. It went in a lot of different directions. It posed a lot of interesting kind of questions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I didn't like it that much.
How strongly did you dislike it?
Well, we're gonna get to our official verdicts later.
Right.
Do you want, like, a rating or what?
No,
I would say this was one of...
What?
Yeah, okay. It was not hard to read. I enjoyed reading it. It was pretty fast, and it was very funny.
It was very funny. It was, like, quite witty, I thought.
But there was, like, no driving force or momentum or anything, I felt like. There was almost no through line. Like, at any given point, I had no clue what Clemens was trying to do on a larger scale. She had no motivation, no want for most of it. Like,
wasn't her want to be happy?
That's so vague. You can't write a screenplay about just that. Like, she needs to have a concrete goal for Act 2.
Well, she wanted a relationship.
Well, she got that pretty early on, and, like, she decides to stay in the sitcom world, and everything is just funny and charming, and there are, like, just whole swaths of pages where nothing progresses. Like, it is kind of like a sitcom. It's like they have several episodes within the second act, basically, where little funny stories will happen, and they'll, like, come up, and then...
it's very sitcom.
And they'll be resolved. Yeah.
Every morning she goes from her apartment down to the next apartment over, and she walks in their door, theme music plays, just like Kramer entering Jerry's apartment in Seinfeld or whatever.
Uh-huh.
And they sit down for breakfast, and then there's some random injection of plot, and then by the end of the day that plot's resolved.
Yeah.
And everyone's okay, and it's comfortable, and it's, like, reassuring.
I think
that's the appeal.
That's great, yeah, I see that, but I feel like they need more. They need something more on her side of things. It needs to mean something more to her each time, or it needs to change the way she sees it. But it really doesn't. Like,
I could probably agree that they don't really raise the stakes to the sitcom world.
There were moments, like when she realized that she couldn't draw anymore.
Couldn't draw again.
That was good.
Anymore. Or like when she even like first goes back to her real world apartment, and she has to pee for a really long time because she hasn't gone to the bathroom and a lot of time has elapsed. And there's all these, like, kind of trade-offy things.
Am I right in thinking that's the purpose of that in the story? Is just to, like, help us have a reason for her to check in with the real world every now and then?
I don't think so, because I never got the impression that she had to pee while she was...
But there were so many times that she went back to the real world to check in with, like, Fitz.
I think she went back and then realized that she really had to pee.
Okay,
I don't think she had to pee when she was in the courtyard.
If that's the case, though, like, I don't know why she was going back to the real world as many times as she did. There were several times where she went back to the apartment, and I was like, what is she doing here? On a story level, I know, because they're trying to, like, create a scenario where she and Fitz can have this conversation. But just on a practical level, she had no, like, actual reason for being there.
Yeah, I guess to your point that it like, not really much changes and there's too much repetition.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that rather than really building, I feel like the screenplay just introduces new things that allow you to see things in a slightly different way, or, like, broach a new issue, new topic.
Mm-hmm. So, are there any particular things you liked about it?
I liked all the sitcom cliches, like the product placement.
Yeah, I like that.
I think there's a lot of commentary, I guess, about the allure of, like, living like you're in a sitcom, but then also about, like, how implausible all that is. Like, you know how Clements sells all of her designer shoes at
Yeah,
one point,
yeah.
you know? And she just has countless pairs and an unlimited wardrobe.
It was funny to me, like, all the work that it goes to make fun of the way people talk in sitcoms.
Right.
Even so, the dialogue in the actual, like, quote-unquote real world within the screenplay also felt a little bit contrived, but it's like a different kind of contrived than sitcoms. But it still feels very much like screenplay dialogue.
Okay. You think this was a negative?
Kind of, because it did a good enough job of distinguishing between the real world and the sitcom world within the screenplay, but I think it would have served it a little bit better, and it would have been a better contrast if the real world dialogue was a little more naturalistic, I guess. Mm-hmm. It was very funny, though.
It was pretty funny. There were some nice wry observations.
Yeah.
A lot of scenes didn't really seem to have much point other than like being funny. But I like how they were. I feel like it was a lot quippier, a lot more quips in the in the sitcom world.
They set up a lot of rules about the way the sitcom world works, but then they very quickly broke some of those rules.
Like what?
Like, she goes for the first time through the gate and her clothes change. Mm-hmm. And then one time when she leaves with one of the other characters back into the real world, because occasionally, like, you know, the laundromat where she first saw them, occasionally the characters do exit into the real world. Mm-hmm. So she was doing that once, and her clothes didn't change.
Say that again?
She was leaving with one of the characters into the real world.
No, they explain this.
What?
It's, if you leave, Nathan says this.
What?
If you leave with either Annie or Harris, then you're all good. You can go back out into the real world looking beautiful.
I don't remember them explaining that.
Yeah.
That seems too complicated.
Because they're like, they'd been there, they are like the sitcom world or whatever.
Well, now, do you believe that? I thought they had also been real people once, and just so far gone they totally forgot.
Yeah. I think.
Okay.
Maybe they're just further gone. But what Nathan says is that if you're with one of them, then you can go out with impunity or whatever.
Yeah.
But then when when Nathan and Clements go out together by themselves, he's looking all schlubby and she's looking less good.
That's a little complicated. I wish they could just keep it one way the whole time.
Yeah.
And then the memory loss thing.
But I mean, I guess that's a distinction they need to make. Otherwise, then there's no boundary. If once you go in, then you can go out and you can stay.
I'm just saying I feel like it should change no matter what when you're going from one to the other. If you're going in, you should always get prettier.
But then there's no reason for her to ever go in.
What do you mean?
Because she wouldn't have seen the Harris, Annie, and Nathan looking all good and like the perfect friend group.
I mean, honestly,
she wouldn't have had the impetus to.
Well, I didn't think that was a very good impetus for her anyway. I felt like she could have just wandered into there. That seems like more of the stereotypical way that these things work. Is
just
like
happenstance.
Just pure happenstance.
Yeah.
And then I was going to also say the memory thing. I felt like was a little inconsistent. Like. She didn't really seem to forget that much. She was bad at drawing, but she always remembered who Fitz was. She remembered who Liam was.
I didn't take it as literally, I guess.
Okay.
Like, I feel like her drawing, her cartoons were like the product of her kind of discontentment. And once she was so happy, she became like complacent and comfortable and like wasn't able to. She didn't have that same well of feeling.
It wasn't just that she was like out of practice.
I didn't think so. And like her not remembering her like pet exchanges with Liam were kind of like, that's just so far in the past, it's been replaced with other stuff. But I guess they kind of equate it to like addiction and to a drug, so maybe it's like a...
Yeah, that was kind of interesting.
Yeah. But one thing that I felt was pretty interesting was when she brings Fitz to the sitcom. Uh-huh. And his experience is entirely different.
Yeah.
he, instead of being transformed into like the best version of himself, or not the best, but like well, maybe
idealized version or something.
Yeah, I guess for Clements, she becomes like a hotter, more successful version of herself.
Right.
But what the screenplay kind of notes, and I think quite well, is that that's because she's like a straight white girl, straight white woman.
Uh-huh.
And she is the star of many, her type is the star of many sitcoms. But then you get Fitz, who's gay, and he's turned into a complete caricature.
He's like the sassy gay friend.
The sassy gay friend
really
who's
stereotypical.
Just the embodiment of all these stereotypes.
Yeah.
And
that was pretty funny and also pretty thoughtful of them.
Yeah, it was like a good critique of
pop culture?
Of pop culture, of sitcoms. Yeah.
But again, this is sort of the funny thing about this story to me is it seems to be criticizing that sort of shallowness that goes on in sitcoms, that kind of like that artifice.
Mm-hmm.
It seemed like even in the real world of the screenplay, it felt very kind of flat to me too. Like, it was strange to me that she has no other friends that they mention, no family even. Like, when she's evicted, she has no one to turn to. It's Fitz that ends up saving her, basically. And so it felt very undeveloped for me in that sense. It did not feel very real, even in the real world for her.
Right.
What else? Do we have anything else you want to cover? That still seems a little extreme, setting the place on fire. Maybe she knew that, like, in sitcom land, probably nobody was really going to get hurt. Although people do definitely die on sitcoms. I don't know.
Yeah, but also, by burning it down, she's ensuring that she doesn't come back.
I guess it was for her own good, but that's kind of harsh on the others, you know? Like, making the decision for them, too, really. Because they, and again, this is what I mentioned about, like, when she was at the homeless shelter, and they kind of allude to the fact that all these other characters have now, they're kind of like refugees in the real world.
Nice, yeah.
But that made Nathan's decision to stay much less meaningful to me, because they make a big deal out of it. When she burns the apartment building down, she's going back to the real world, and Nathan's like, no, I'm going to stay. And then we find out later,
with the rest of the sitcom characters, yeah.
And then we find out later, like, well, all of them ended up in the real world too, so he really didn't make a decision. He tried to, but it didn't really amount to anything.
I feel like they should have made it clear what happened to the
sitcom world
and the sitcom characters within it.
Yeah, I agree.
They allude to it. I don't know if we're correct in like drawing from that line in the homeless shelter what we did, but it seems that way.
I think that's what it was.
Yeah.
So what would be your verdict on the writer and on the script?
I feel like I would give them both considers.
Both considers?
Yeah.
I feel like, and maybe I'm sort of seeing this from like a jaded producer type perspective. I would maybe consider the script if you could just rewrite the crap out of it.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. Well, I guess I would. Yeah, I would want to consider the writer too, though, because she clearly is really good at writing funny dialogue.
This was, I would say, definitely the funniest script we've read so far.
Yeah, I think I agree.
And it was like clever humor too.
Yeah, it was.
Some of it.
So I guess I'm really struggling with whether to consider the script. I would almost just pass on the script and then consider the writer, because I think she could do a much better job with like a more grounded story, I think. 'Cause most of the problems I had with this were to do with the mechanics of the whole sitcom world thing.
I don't know. I mean, overall, I liked it quite a bit. More than last week's, for sure.
I don't know if I like it more than last week's or not.
Really?
I like the dialogue more, for sure. So I guess, yeah, I'm going to try and take a hard line on this and say, pass on the script, consider on the writer.
Okay. There you have it.